A motor built 30 years ago. Still running. Still reliable. Still getting fishermen home. A motor built 3 years ago. Dead at the dock. Waiting for a dealer. Waiting for a computer to tell it what went wrong. This isn't supposed to happen. Newer is supposed to mean better. More technology is supposed to mean more reliability. So why are engines from the Clinton era outlasting engines from the smartphone era? Why are mechanics across America seeing the same thing? Old outboards that refuse to quit and new ones that refuse to start. Something changed. Something nobody talks about. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what the marine industry doesn't want you to know. But first, drop a comment right now. What's the oldest outboard you've ever seen still running strong? I want to hear your stories. And if you're the kind of boater who believes in doing your own research before spending your hard-earned money, hit that subscribe button and the bell icon. Because what comes next might just save you from the most expensive mistake you'll ever make on the water. This is the truth about outboard motors. The real truth. Let's get into it. In boatyards from Florida to British Columbia, a quiet truth has been playing out for years. Mechanics who have spent decades working on outboard motors will tell you something that sounds almost impossible. The motors they repaired in the 1980s and 90s, the ones their fathers worked on, are still coming back. Not for major surgery, just for tune-ups, oil changes, the occasional impeller swap. These machines refuse to die. Walk into any commercial fishing dock in the Gulf of Mexico, and you will find them. Johnson V4S from 1988, Yamaha 220s from 1993, Mercury V6 two-strokes that have seen more ocean than most people will see in a lifetime. Their paint is faded. Their cowlings are scratched. But when you turn the key, they fire up like they did the day they left the factory. The question is simple. Why? The answer begins with understanding what these motors were designed to be. In the 1980s and 90s, an outboard motor was not a computer. It was not a network of sensors and software. It was a mechanical tool built by engineers who expected their customers to understand it, maintain it, and when necessary, fix it themselves. A carbureted two-stroke outboard from this era contained fewer than 50 moving parts in its fuel system. There were no electronic control modules, no throttle position sensors, no oxygen sensors monitoring exhaust gases. The fuel delivery was handled by a simple carburetor, a device that mixed air and gasoline using basic physics. Vacuum pressure pulled fuel through jets. A float valve controlled the fuel level. If something went wrong, you could see it. You could touch it. You could fix it with a screwdriver, a wrench, and a can of carburetor cleaner. This was not primitive technology. This was intentional design. The engineers at Outboard Marine Corporation, at Mercury, at Yamaha, they understood something fundamental about their customers. These were fishermen, charter captains, weekend boaters who trailered their rigs to remote lakes. They needed motors that would start when they turned the key, run all day without complaint, and get them home when the weather turned ugly. And if something went wrong, they needed to be able to diagnose the problem at the dock, not wait 3 weeks for a dealer appointment. The result was a generation of outboards built with extraordinary margins of safety. Powerheads were over-engineered. Lower units were designed to survive abuse. Parts were standardized across model years, sometimes across decades. A water pump impeller from a 1985 Mercury would fit a 1998 Mercury. A carburetor rebuild kit cost $40. A lower unit seal kit cost $60. Everything was accessible. Everything was logical. And the motors responded to this philosophy by lasting far beyond their expected lifespans. Industry data suggests that a well-maintained two-stroke outboard from this era could reasonably achieve 1,500 to 2,000 hours of operation. But commercial operators regularly reported 3,000 hours. 4,000 hours. Some Yamaha 225s have been documented running past 6,500 hours, the equivalent of driving a car over 200,000 miles, with nothing more than scheduled maintenance. These were not flukes. These were the natural result of building machines that prioritized durability over everything else. The owners who ran these motors understood them intimately. They knew the sound of a healthy idle. They recognized the subtle vibration that meant a spark plug was fouling. They could smell when the water pump was running dry. This knowledge, passed from generation to generation, created a partnership between man and machine that kept these outboards running long after accountants would have written them off. But this era did not last. It could not last, because forces far beyond the boatyard were already gathering. The change did not arrive with fanfare. It came quietly, through regulations written in Washington and boardroom decisions made in Wisconsin and Japan. By the time most boaters noticed, the transformation was already complete. In the late 1990s, the Environmental Protection Agency turned its attention to marine engines. The traditional two-stroke outboard, for all its reliability, had a dirty secret. It burned oil by design. It released unburned fuel into the water. It produced hydrocarbon emissions that failed to meet the agency's increasingly strict clean air standards. The numbers were damning. A single afternoon of recreational boating could produce more smog-forming emissions than driving a car for an entire year. The EPA did not ban two-stroke outboards outright. It did something more effective. It established emissions standards that carbureted two-strokes could not meet. Manufacturers faced a choice: reinvent the outboard motor or abandon the market entirely. They chose reinvention. The first attempts were rocky. Outboard Marine Corporation partnered with a German company called Ficht to develop direct fuel injection for two-strokes. The technology promised cleaner combustion by injecting fuel directly into the cylinder rather than mixing it in the carburetor. But the initial systems failed durability testing. Engines that performed beautifully in the lab broke down in the field. OMC, already struggling financially, never fully recovered from the setback. The company filed for bankruptcy in 2000. Other manufacturers fared better. Mercury developed its OptiMax system. Yamaha invested heavily in four-stroke technology. Suzuki and Honda, already experienced with automotive fuel injection, brought their expertise to the marine market. By the mid-2000s, electronic fuel injection had become standard on all but the smallest outboards. The carbureted era was over. The new motors were cleaner. They were more fuel efficient. They produced more power per pound than their predecessors. On paper, they were superior in almost every measurable way. But something fundamental had changed inside the cowling. A modern electronic fuel injection system does not rely on physics and vacuum pressure. It relies on data. Sensors monitor throttle position, air temperature, manifold pressure, engine speed, and exhaust oxygen content. This information feeds into an engine control module, essentially a small computer, that calculates the precise amount of fuel to inject into each cylinder at each moment. The system adjusts itself thousands of times per second, optimizing combustion for conditions that a carburetor could never anticipate. This is remarkable engineering. It is also remarkably complex. Where a 1992 Johnson had a fuel system you could disassemble on a picnic table, a 2022 Mercury has a fuel system that requires specialized diagnostic software to understand. The sensors that make modern efficiency possible are also potential points of failure. A faulty throttle position sensor can prevent the engine from starting. A corroded connection in the wiring harness can trigger a cascade of error codes. Problems that would have been obvious on an older motor, a clogged jet, a stuck float, become invisible until a computer translates them into language a technician can read. And those computers are not cheap. Professional marine diagnostic systems cost between $3,000 and $8,000. They require annual software subscriptions. They demand training that most backyard mechanics do not possess. The relationship between owner and motor, once intimate and hands-on, became mediated by technology that only dealers could fully access. The motors got smarter. The owners got locked out. And the bills started climbing. Service costs that once measured in the tens of dollars now measured in the hundreds. Diagnostic fees alone could run $100 to $300 before a single wrench was turned. Annual service on a 250 horsepower outboard began approaching $1,000 at authorized dealers. The question nobody asked was simple: What happens when all this technology fails? The failures began showing up in service bays across the country. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, persistently, in ways that revealed a troubling pattern. A center console owner in Charleston brings his 3-year-old outboard in because it will not start. The battery is fine. The fuel is fresh. But the motor sits dead, waiting for a technician to connect a laptop and interrogate its electronic brain. The diagnosis takes 45 minutes. The culprit is a corroded ground wire that costs $8 to replace. The labor bill is $270. A charter captain in the Florida Keys notices his twin outboards running rough at idle. He has been running boats for 30 years. On his old motors, he would have cleaned the carburetors and been back on the water by lunch. On his new motors, he schedules an appointment, waits 9 days for an opening, and pays $1,400 to learn that a fuel injector needed cleaning. A retired couple in Michigan buys their dream boat with a brand new 4-stroke outboard. They use it 6 times the first summer. The second summer, it will not start. The ethanol in the fuel has degraded. Moisture has entered the system. The fuel pump, fuel lines, and injectors all require service. The estimate exceeds $2,000. They sell the boat at a loss. These stories repeat themselves in marinas from Maine to California. The specific failures vary. The frustration is universal. Modern outboards are not unreliable in the traditional sense. They do not blow up. They do not seize. They rarely suffer the catastrophic powerhead failures that occasionally killed older two-strokes. But they fail in different ways. Quietly, electronically, in ways that leave owners stranded not because their motor is broken, but because their motor has decided it will not run until a computer says it can. The irony is bitter. A 1990 Evinrude with a fouled spark plug would run rough, but it would run. You could limp home. A 2022 outboard with a faulty sensor might refuse to start entirely. Its safety systems interpreting the bad data as a catastrophic condition requiring immediate shutdown. And when these failures occur, owners discover the uncomfortable truth about their relationship with modern marine technology. They do not own their motors in the way their fathers owned theirs. They lease access to systems controlled by manufacturers and serviced exclusively by authorized dealers. The diagnostic computers required to properly service these engines are proprietary. Mercury uses its own system. Yamaha uses another. Suzuki and Honda have their own platforms. An independent marine mechanic who wants to work on all 4 brands must invest tens of thousands of dollars in diagnostic equipment, plus ongoing subscription fees, plus factory training certifications. Many simply refuse. They focus on older motors, the ones they can still understand with their hands and their ears. This creates a service bottleneck that compounds the reliability problem. Authorized dealers become overwhelmed during peak season. Wait times stretch from days to weeks. Owners who need their boats for commercial purposes lose income. Recreational boaters lose precious summer weekends. The frustration builds, and it is reflected in the market. Global boat sales dropped 9.1% in the first half of 2024 compared to the previous year. Brunswick Corporation, parent company of Mercury Marine, reported a 23% decline in propulsion sales. Outboard motors specifically fell 24%. The marine industry, which boomed during the pandemic as Americans sought outdoor escapes, has entered a painful correction. High interest rates shoulder much of the blame. Inflation has stretched household budgets. But quietly, in conversations at boat shows and in comments on enthusiast forums, another factor emerges: trust. The bond between boater and motor, once unshakable, has begun to fray. To understand how we arrived here, you must stop thinking about outboard motors as machines. Start thinking about them as products of competing forces: engineering, regulation, economics, each pulling in different directions, each leaving its fingerprints on the motors hanging off transoms. Today, the engineering trade-off is real. Modern 4-stroke and electronic fuel injection systems exist because they solve genuine problems. They burn cleaner. They sip fuel, where older two-strokes gulped it. They deliver power curves that carbureted motors could never match. A 2024 Yamaha V8 produces 300 horsepower while meeting emissions standards that would have seemed impossible in 1990. This is not marketing fiction. This is measurable progress. But progress comes with weight, not just physical weight, though four-strokes are heavier than equivalent two-strokes. The weight of complexity, the weight of interdependence. Each sensor relies on other sensors. Each system connects to other systems. The engine control module that optimizes combustion also creates a single point of failure that older motors never had. When everything works, it works beautifully. When something fails, the cascade can be swift and total. Engineers understand these trade-offs. They accept them because the benefits outweigh the costs in controlled conditions. What they cannot control is how motors are used in the real world. Saltwater intrusion, ethanol-contaminated fuel, extended storage without proper winterization, owners who skip maintenance because the motor seems fine. The harsh marine environment attacks electronic systems with a persistence that laboratory testing cannot fully simulate. The business model shift compounds a problem. Manufacturers have discovered that service relationships can be as profitable as initial sales. When diagnostic access requires proprietary equipment, dealers become gatekeepers. When software updates are necessary for proper function, ongoing relationships become mandatory. This is not conspiracy. This is the logical evolution of industries that have watched Apple and John Deere build empires on ecosystem control. Consider the economics from a manufacturer's perspective. A customer who buys a carbureted outboard and maintains it himself for 30 years represents one sale. A customer who buys an electronic fuel injection outboard and returns to the dealer annually for service represents recurring revenue. A customer whose motor requires dealer diagnostics for even minor issues represents captured revenue. The incentive to design for independent serviceability diminishes when dependence is more profitable. Parts availability follows the same logic. Manufacturers have limited incentive to produce replacement parts for older models when those parts enable owners to delay purchasing new motors. The window of parts support grows shorter. The pressure to replace rather than repair grows stronger. The $1,000 repair becomes the $8,000 repower, becomes the $40,000 new boat. And beneath all of this lies the knowledge gap. The generation of boaters who learned to maintain their own motors is aging. Their children grew up with outboards that discouraged tinkering. Their grandchildren may never hold a spark plug wrench. The skills that kept 1992 Johnsons running for 3 decades are not being passed down. They are being lost. Marine mechanics who built careers on carbureted motors are retiring. The technicians replacing them train on diagnostic software, not mechanical intuition. They can read error codes with precision, but ask them to tune a carburetor by ear, and they reach for a computer that does not exist for that motor. The old knowledge fades. The new knowledge is narrower, more specialized, more dependent on tools the average owner cannot access. The relationship between boater and motor has fundamentally transformed. What was once a partnership is now a dependency. What was once understood is now opaque. What was once fixable at the dock now requires an appointment, a diagnostic fee, and faith in systems beyond the owner's control. This is not progress. This is a trade-off. And trade-offs have costs. So where does this leave the boater standing at a crossroads, wallet in hand, trying to decide what motor deserves his trust? The honest answer is that there is no single right choice. There are 2 paths, each with its own costs and rewards. Understanding them clearly is the first step toward making a decision you can live with. The modern path offers genuine advantages. Fuel efficiency that stretches your dollar further on every trip. Emissions clean enough to satisfy regulators and your own conscience. Warranty protection that covers catastrophic failures for 3 to 5 years. Resale values that hold stronger in the short term. And performance characteristics, instant throttle response, smooth idle, effortless starting, that older motors simply cannot match. if you have access to authorized service networks, if you budget for professional maintenance, if you prioritize capability over independence, modern outboards deliver remarkable experiences on the water. The Vintage Path offers different rewards. Mechanical transparency that allows you to understand, diagnose, and repair your own motor. Acquisition costs that leave money in your pocket for fuel, tackle, and time on the water. Parts availability that stretches across decades, with rebuild kits and replacement components still manufactured for motors that left the factory before some of their owners were born. And a relationship with your machine built on knowledge rather than faith. If you possess mechanical aptitude, if you embrace self-reliance, if you boat in remote areas where dealers are distant memories, a well-chosen vintage outboard can serve you faithfully for decades more. Some experienced boaters choose both. They mount a modern primary motor for power and efficiency, then hang a vintage kicker on the transom for insurance. When electronics fail, when sensors corrupt, when the primary motor decides it will not run, the kicker gets them home. It is redundancy built on wisdom earned the hard way. For those considering used modern outboards, due diligence becomes essential. Demand complete diagnostic reports before purchase. Examine the hours broken down by RPM range. Excessive idle time suggests neglect. Constant high RPM operation suggests abuse. Verify service records through manufacturer networks. Ask about warranty claim history. Budget for ongoing dealer relationships as a cost of ownership, not an optional expense. For those considering vintage outboards, different rules apply. Compression test every cylinder. It remains the truest indicator of remaining powerhead life. Prioritize motors from freshwater environments where corrosion has not attacked internal components. Plan for immediate water pump impeller replacement, carburetor rebuild, and fuel line inspection. Verify parts availability for your specific model before committing. Some vintage motors remain well supported. Others have become orphans. And for every boater, regardless of which path you choose, certain truths remain constant. Use your motor regularly. Engines that sit deteriorate faster than engines that run. Flush with fresh water after every saltwater exposure, without exception. Use ethanol-free fuel when available. Treat fuel with quality stabilizer when storage exceeds 2 weeks. These simple practices have kept motors running for generations. They still work today. The durability gap between 1990s outboards and 2020s outboards is real. But it is not a verdict on technology itself. It is a reflection of choices made across decades by engineers, regulators, executives, and owners. Some of those choices prioritize the wrong values. Some simply accepted trade-offs that future generations would pay for. Those old motors still running are not relics of a simpler time. They are evidence of a different philosophy, a philosophy that believed machines should serve their owners, not the other way around. That longevity mattered more than quarterly earnings. That the person turning the key deserved to understand what happened when the motor roared to life. That philosophy is not dead, but it is endangered. The motor that will still be running 30 years from now is the one someone maintains with their own hands. That was true in 1990. It remains true today. The only question left is whether you will be the one holding the wrench.